November 20th, 2024, Board of Douglas County Commissioners work session. It's 4 o'clock work session. At our work sessions, it's an opportunity for us to listen and learn, ask questions. We do not take public comment during this time, but we will, of course, take public comment during our regular business meeting at 5:30. Sarah, I think, is going to start us off for our Judicial and Law Enforcement Center update.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm going to let the team introduce itself. Just want to sort of set the stage a bit. Today, a lot of this is going to be some review of where we're at in the project, everything we've been doing for the last, as we counted them up, 7 years working towards this on this project, and where we are in the process of design and development. And then that team's going to turn it back over to me, and I'm going to talk through some of the financing and how we're going to afford the project. So, Jay, I'll let you start the introductions.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jay Zimmershed. I have with us from our design and construction team, Chris Berkmeyer and Tim Mockingay. Chris is from Trainer Architects and Tim is with J.E. Dunn.
Jay has to figure out how to
Yes,
share.
give me just a moment, please.
There's the screen. Those 3 little dots, there you go.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Chris Berkmeyer. I'm with Trainer Architects. And as Sarah said, this is pretty much revisiting a lot of the images, a lot of the design that we've shown you previously. We've been working towards, and we call them construction documents. That's where that development's at currently. And to be honest, we're actually kind of right at the end of them. We're basically done. And so once we get done with our documents, then the contractors can use those to start that bidding process. And Tim's going to talk about that for a little while. Go on to the next slide here. Okay, so that's kind of an agenda of what we're wanting to do. We've got a timeline here that kind of shows, like Sarah said, 7 years, so quite a while. And we've finally gotten to this point, so that's exciting. A little bit about the design. It won't be the full design of all the floor plans and things like that. Just some renderings to kind of remind you of what these buildings look like and what they're going to look like. And then what we're going to do for our next steps.
As Sarah mentioned, we've been at this about 7 years. It predates my time here at the county. The initial master plan was started back in 2017. Like many things, it kind of happened right when COVID did, so there was kind of a pause in time. But then the project, or the idea of the project, picked back up in 2022, where we revisited that master plan. And then you can see all the various dates of RFP for selection of design team, RFP for selection of construction manager, the number of times that we've been back before this board, kind of giving you updates and showing you what's going on and how the project is developing and what the scope looks like. All culminating, we believe, in the anticipation of presentation of a GMP to this group at your December 11th meeting of this year. So that's coming very quickly.
GMP stands for?
GMP is guaranteed maximum price.
Which that last meeting is the last item on that list, so in anticipation for that. So I'll talk a little bit about the public safety building and what that means. It's located right out over here next to the jail, and that's the side yard of the jail. It's a little confusing, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this. We've got a base bid, and the base bid, for lack of a better word, is between those 2 blue images, and that consists of a lower level, which is your 911 and your emergency operations center, the centers and the supporting spaces for that. And then up above, eventually it will be a full build out for the sheriff's office. And all of that group will move out there to be with their staff at the jail too. We've got a little bit of a public entrance on the north side there, which is very minimal public need to be there, but we need to accommodate some. But most of the staff parking is around the back of the jail through a secure gate, fence, and then they have their own parking lot there as well. This is part of that base bid. The lower level is on the left, which is the 911 and dispatch area, and then the EOC. And then on the right, it would be, just for lack of a better word, we call it a shell space. So those areas that are just kind of white and that are blank, they won't have any walls built there. There won't be ceilings. There will be insulation. It'll be a warm building. It will be able to sustain itself through the weather, but there won't be any drywall on the walls. We call it a warm shell. The spaces that are in color are actually quarters that we need to get to that lower level from a front door. And you can see it's a small building, if you will, pretty small area. And then these next images start to show what our alternate consists of, which is what they're bidding right now. So our base bid's in the middle, and then we have these alternate pieces on both sides, kind of like bookends, if you will. And if the alternate's accepted, then we'll be able to build out the full shell space. We'll have a lobby for the public to come and we can agree to move them to those spaces that are finished. And we also have some storage areas in the back on the left side. Some vehicles, I know right now you guys are renting some space for vehicles. They will actually be housed out here. And we will move property and evidence out here as well, and which will move from the existing JLEC building, which makes the most sense. Once this building is built out, everything needs to be out here anyway.
You mentioned the storage. Is that the light green? Is that evidence storage that's currently at the JLEC?
Yes. It's kind of there's two greens there. It's kind of a turquoise, yeah. And that's operable storage shelving, and that's where they process. And they also have pass-through lockers there as well to maintain their chain of custody.
I think it's important to note, just to put a little nuance on that, Chris, there'll be some small evidence storage for court proceedings that remains at the Judicial and Law Enforcement Center once this is fully built out, as well. The sheriff's courtroom security folks will be retained at the Judicial and Law Enforcement building, which I want to start just calling the courthouse. And then I work in the historic courthouse. So there'll be some smaller footprints for those in that building.
Yeah, if it's being used in a case, it will be there in the courtroom. Exactly. And we have secure holding for that so that it's locked up and it's safe. Okay, so this is something that we're not bidding fully built out at all, but I wanted to show it to you so you at least could see kind of what it looks like. The sheriff operations are in the middle and administration's on the right side, and then full build out of evidence, and there's a locker room and training area along with that vehicle storage on the end. So in a perfect world, if we weren't worried as much about budgets as we all know we have to be, this would be the full build out of what that space looks above, with the dispatch and EOC below it. A couple of renderings of the exterior. This is the front door. Looking from the parking lot, the public would arrive here at that middle door and then go in and either be greeted, or if they had to write a report, or be taken back to one of the departments as needed. We'll show another rendering, but on the left side is kind of that secure entrance down the side of the building. There will be a fence there and screening so people can't see it as well as this rendering is. We just didn't want to cover up the building with a fence at this point. And so this is a rendering kind of the other side of that. Metal exterior with masonry, and then metal soffits. JLEC, just for a reminder, not as extensive as explanation because the alternates aren't quite as great. So this is the site plan. Nothing has really changed. The additions on the south side of the existing building. There are a couple of parking improvements and things that we're showing in these site plans, and we'll talk about those in the alternates as well. A couple of renderings of the courtrooms. I know the courtroom design has changed a little bit, especially the color of that wood. I didn't realize that, but our renderings didn't catch up again. We've done construction documents and moved forward, but these were the same renderings and basically the same look and flavor of the courtrooms. This will be the corridor on the outside of the courtrooms where the public access those spaces. And an exterior rendering as well. Okay, Tim.
All right, thanks, Chris. As Chris has been finishing the design, we over the last month have been really excited to get this out to the public, and I'm very happy to share that we have great news on interest in the market in the project. That's the best way to drive value for every dollar to get a lot of bidders involved in the project to drive value into the project. So we did accept bids over the dates that are listed there, basically 4 separate bid days, depending on the bid package for the different buildings over the last week. We bid out 30 bid packages on the public safety building and 34 on the JLEC. Combined, we received over 202 bids, individual bids for those packages, which is a little over, close to 3.5 bids per package. Our goal is anything over 3, we start to get pretty confident about hitting our budget. So we were really happy to see that, and it speaks to how much the community and the surrounding areas were really engaged in this project and excited about bidding and being a part of the construction on this project. So currently, we received those bids. Currently, we are what's called shaking out the bids or vetting them out and making sure that we have apples to apples, so that we've bought the different scopes that we intended to do. So that's taking place over the next week or two, right to be right after Thanksgiving. We'll finish that up, and we'll put together what's called that GMP, guaranteed maximum price, and review that with the county, and then come back to present that on the 11th. After the GMP is approved, we're still on the similar construction timeframe that we've been talking about before. Starting the JLEC, that tower, the courthouse addition tower in January, this coming January. That tower will complete the summer of 26, so about an 18-month project. After the tower is completed, we will then start the renovation of the existing JLEC for a year, and that'll complete a year later, the summer of 27. While the tower is being built at the courthouse, similar time frame for building that public safety building, spring of 25 through spring of 26. So the goal is to complete the new construction of both of those items, the public safety building and the new courthouse, so that occupants can move out of the JLEC into the new spaces, and then we start renovating the floors one by one in a sequence that we're working with the county on. So at this point, I think maybe all of us are going to cover this, but we'd like to talk through the alternates that we bid. So when we went out to bid, what's called base bid is the base scope, the scope that we know based on all of our discussions that we're going to bid. But to allow some flexibility as budget allows or as bids come in different, we did propose different alternates, and each of the bidders bid those alternates for each building. So I think Chris will talk through those.
Another thing I'd like to add is this allows us to kind of control how much money at bid day that we're spending. So if we're over or under a little bit, this gives us opportunities to take advantage of all that bidding and all that climate that Tim was talking about and that competitiveness, and actually apply it to some of these other improvements, or some of them are deduct alternates and some things that we might not necessarily want or have to have, but we'd like to have them, and we think that eventually it would help out all the persons who are working in these spaces. I'll read through these. I don't need to read through them all if you don't want me to, but a lot of them are parking lots. We'll start at the top. JLEC, alternate one is that parking lot renovation and readjustment, because we're going to be short spaces. After we put this addition on, we're going to lose some of our spaces we have today, and hopefully this will help alleviate some of that.
Commissioners, this is the parking lot that is south of the historic courthouse now. By reconfiguring that lot and doing some work in there, we were thinking we could gain around 17 spaces there, based on historically actually how it was parked. And so we're looking at making that as part of this, and parking will be a premium. And so we saw that as an opportunity to find some very close to both of the main entries really to the building. So that was the evolution of that one.
Number 2, we're looking at some of the restrooms, the public restrooms. It's not so much that they have to be replaced, but they're dated. It would be nice to go in there and refinish those, add new fixtures, maybe even some tile and ceiling work and things like that. So that's basically what that pertains to. And we don't know how much each of these cost yet. That might help with some of the selections eventually. But we'll be able to, or Tim will be able to put a price to these, and then we'll know if we want to afford them or not. Alternate three.
Before you go to that
sure.
one, that alternate two is a direct reflection of what the commissioners discussed at our last update about trying to get as much of the law enforcement center, soon to be courthouse, updated. As we mentioned, we've been waiting on updates in that building since 2017. Linda comes to me, Jimmy comes to me, other people say, we should really update this. And I said, wait, we're going to build you a whole new courthouse. So it is, I really would love for us to get as much of this done in terms of the renovation and not leave places of the building from the 1970s.
Number three is a courtroom. Right now, we have one of our 10 courtrooms that are being shelled, needing the spaces there. But if we couldn't afford to build them all out, one of them would not be built out. And so if we can afford it and you guys decide that's where you want to spend that money on, then we'll be able to build out all the courtrooms, hopefully on day one. Court services, another internal space that either we're going to reuse existing rooms and finishes, or we can build those spaces out and accommodate exactly the amount of rooms and spaces they need. Right now, we're leaving it as it is. Number five, PV panels on the roof, photovoltaic. Basically, we know that the county was interested in having those types of amenities at the facilities, both of these. And so we decided to bid those out as an alternate to see what that value is worth.
I think it's important to realize that that is just for the new tower. We're not looking at placing photovoltaic at this time on the existing JLE building. It has to do with the roof and its age and how it was originally installed and complications with that. So just to clarify that.
And this one's listed as a floating PV system as opposed to in the public safety, it's called mounted on the building site. What's the difference there?
So the floating is you install your roofing membrane and it literally floats on blocks. So it sits above the membrane on weighted blocks and just right above the roofing. On the public safety building, it's not on the roof, it's actually on the yard, and it is installed on steel posts into the ground and bolted to those steel posts.
So that's a ground mount
Ground mount,
is what's
yep.
being proposed there. Why not roof mount?
Mainly due to how the roof layout is and the best economic value for getting solar panels was the ground mounted, and you happen to have a lot of ground by that location of the building.
Ground mount is significantly cheaper, and it is also less invasive to the systems in the roof or the building. So that's what we have the space. So that's what we decided to bid out for the PSB.
And just to add on that, the roof mounted, if you were ever to have a roof issue, roof leak, you shouldn't have that for decades to come. But when it does time, you have to remove the solar panels to then get to the roof.
Speaking of roofs, alternate number six, we wanted to have a cost to do that SBS roof, a 3-ply, which is what is there now on the existing building, as opposed to the TPO roof, which is a single-ply system. Both roofs are good. Some will argue one way or the other, but they're both quality roofs, 20-plus year warranty on all of them. But to keep them the same, it might be easier to have the one roofing contractor could fix one roof while they fix the other, or if they have to put additional connections on the roof, it's all the same system. And that was the only reason for that.
I know we're not putting prices to these things yet, but I don't know those two roofing systems. Can you cover that pretty quickly?
So a built-up roofing system has got layers of membrane. I think it's 3 layers, and it's kind of an asphalt product. The TPO roof is, and you've seen them on a lot of buildings, it's a single-ply membrane with a certain thickness to get a warranty, and it's applied right on top of the substrate below it. Tim's or something better. Okay, if you're the contractor, you probably should answer that one. Alternate number 7, lower level, again, kind of like what Sarah was saying. We're trying to touch all the spaces we can touch, upgrade them, new finishes, make the facility look whole, if you will, to today's current finish standards and not have something that's dated. Public safety building. Well, alternate 1 is the one that I spend a lot of time in the floor plans to show what the alternate is versus the base bid. And we somehow had to describe that, and it's added increased square footage to base building. But that's really what that means, that entire shell space being built out, that's warm and can easily be renovated in the future once you guys have time or money to move the sheriff's departments over there.
It's worth noting that this alternate also includes the evidence storage area being built out. And that will help the layout of the JLAC. If we were to accept that, it ends up helping the flow and the phasing of the JLAC when we start renovations over there.
Since we came back to this, I was curious because you highlighted the evidence storage. The gray area for the vehicle storage was also colored in. Will that be available to be used in that scenario?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
The rent or space that you're renting today can be actually monies put into this building, and we don't have to rent space somewhere else, and then they have all their vehicles and things together, which makes a lot of sense.
So all the office space really is what we're talking about, leaving as a blank space, but insulated
Yes.
in that scenario. Okay, thank you.
It also helps when it comes time to do those improvements and to build that space out. It's a lot easier when the shell's already there and it's a continuous building with all the mechanical systems in place. So, yeah. This one's actually a deduct. We've got skylights on the public safety building, and it's not something that we have to have, but it's something that really makes that environment a lot nicer on the interior. We did a sun study of it and tried to show how that light moves and changes through the day. Usually when you have windows on the outside of a building, you're only kind of capturing daylight 20 feet plus or minus into the building. And so there's always kind of a dark space in the middle of it. So we'd like to try to open that up, whether we push the roof up higher or add a skylight. And we wanted to see what the value of that was, and then you guys can make a decision on whether or not the skylights are needed for those spaces. The next two are parking lots. So we had a parking lot on the southeast, which is spaces that will let the sheriff's staff move into those. Once they move out there, all those patrol vehicles will move from the courthouse out to this space. And so we had to add spaces for them. But until all those departments move, they really don't need parking spaces. So that was something that does not have to be built day one, and it is easy to add later, actually.
Will we get some numbers on how many spots are currently at the JLEC that will then need to be moved over as those pieces move over? Because that's also a question of like, we know we're taking away some parking
Yes.
there downtown, but that we also should be taking away some of the need.
Yes, exactly. Even with dispatch and EOC moving out there, they won't need parking spaces at the existing courthouse. So Tim's got a whole, not with him, but he does have an analysis of all those parking spaces and what's coming and going, and we can share it with you.
Yeah, for the public safety building, my understanding is they have ample spaces right now. When we do phase one, which is 911 and emergency operations, there's no need at that point for additional spots at public safety building. Alternate 3 and 4 really come into play when the sheriff moves out their actual office spaces. That is at the point you would need parking out there, additional.
So you'll give us those numbers about like how many spaces then will be freed up at the JLEC or downtown
Yeah, we can
generally?
provide that with you.
Okay.
Yep.
We can do that.
And then number 5 is the one we've talked about with the PV solar system that's mounting on the ground mounted instead of roof mounted. Any other comments about alternates?
I'll just have one question. When we get the further details about the alternates specific to the solar, do we have any understanding of how much it will cover our costs? Will we have any of that analysis available, those projections about how much it'll offset or cover?
Yeah, I know that Kim and Jamie did some of that work earlier this year, and we can bring that back to just put in the whole packet.
They usually have a cost analysis to figure out how quick or slow it pays itself back. So yes, that's and our engineers also got some of that information as well, so sure.
Will we get a site plan that shows the proposed location for ground-mounted solar? 'Cause I know it's not noted yet.
Yes, we have actually not drawn all that in and where it's going to go, but yeah, we'll dedicate a space for it. And we'll probably have to put a fence around it to keep people from doing whatever they would do to it. So to kind of help with mitigating anything like that. So yeah, it needs to be designed out for sure.
I don't know if you'll have that designed before the 11th, because I think commissioners, they want to make sure you're going to approve it, and then we can bring it back to you and talk about that piece, since it's an ad alternate.
The way they're bidding both of those, the PV systems for both facilities, it's a performance spec, we call it, which is really not a drawing at all. It's text and document that way, and they can read, okay, here's all the requirements. And then those contractors who install those systems, they know what that design is needed from that performance. Yeah, we're not actually drawing all the panels everywhere yet. So,
I think, Chris, she's just more concerned with where are we putting it on the
yes,
site.
what it's gonna look like. And so are we. We want it to look nice.
And also, if this is being bid by companies, like what are they basing it on in terms of the size of the system, the output of the system for each of these? Is it a percentage of total use? Is it what pans out with the net metering that we can get? Just some of that. I'll have questions more about that. I know we don't have those yet.
Well, I can't answer, just that it was the performance space spec said this many kilowatts, and I want to say it was 175 kilowatts that would keep us below the threshold that requires us to do certain things with Evergy system. If we start going too much higher, you have to add a lot of different electrical infrastructure. So
And that's 175 or thereabouts for each of those two systems?
And that was dictated by Evergy, basically, on what they could handle by their infrastructure. So the lines coming into the building that supply power can only handle so much kilowatts generated by PV. So yeah, it's kind of reverse. And that's all the slides. Figured we talk about next steps and what we need to do.
You want to stop
and-
sharing? Do you want to talk more now, Tim, on the bidding? Or you did your part, so it's all me. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen, and while I'm pulling it up, commissioners, just want to set the stage a bit for what will happen on the 11th. In addition to Dunn coming in with a guaranteed maximum price for the construction, Jay and team will continue to work on costs that'll be outside of that exact construction, include furnitures, fixtures, equipment, design, different issues like that. And then there will be a total project budget. In between now and then, staff are going to review these ad alternates and make some recommendations to commissioners on which ad alternates we recommend you taking. You'll see the full cost of each of them, but we're gonna, depending on how the dollars come in, and we'll make some recommendations to you. And then on the 11th, commissioners can decide, no, we don't like what you and Jay put in for that ad alternate. We want to take that one out and put in this other one. So that's what you're going to see when we come back to you on the 11th. I'm going to share mine in Adobe because mine is got a lot of little numbers, and then that way I can zoom in on it. All right. So commissioners, I'm going to talk about our financing options available for this project and what we've been working on. Just to remind anyone who might be listening, the county has debt, or general obligation bonds, in three places. The first of which is our bond and interest fund. And the only debt it has is for community improvement projects. So that means that we issued the debt and the property owners are paying us back. So there's no tax dollars that are going to that project. And that's in our bond and interest fund.
We normally call that specials, right?
Yeah, it's sort of weird in a county sense. It's not true specials like it is in a city, but yeah. And then in the behavioral health sales tax, that fund holds the debt for the treatment and recovery center and treatment and recovery center campus. And then the rest of our very small amount of debt is in the CIP sales tax fund. So I know it's strange because you have a bond and interest fund that doesn't really have community supported debt, and then our community supported debt is in our CIP sales tax fund. That fund only receives sales tax proceeds. The county is authorized, based off of the ballot initiative, to pass that sales tax to issue debt from those proceeds. It receives half of the county's sales tax proceeds. I just wanted to show you this chart, and commissioners see this every year as we go through the budget process. This is the volatility of our sales tax. I've worked in cities that are more sales tax reliant. Sean's worked in them. it's very volatile and it's all over the place. It's a bigger deal for cities, particularly here in Douglas County. A smaller portion of our revenue comes from sales tax and is less predictable. So that means when I'm trying to project ahead here in terms of what we can support, I'm going to be very cautious and very conservative in my approach, because you see we've had years where we've been as low as, 0.3. Or 1.7, and then we've had years that were 12.77. So, trying to figure out what's going to be consistent in that regard is a challenge. And as you can see, commissioners, we're showing here our 2024 estimated total. This is still estimated. This is if we kind of it's a still very conservative estimate of 9.7. Our budget for 2025 is under that amount at 9.5. So that means, next year I'm counting on getting $200,000 less. I anticipate will be more than that, but it to me illustrates the conservative approach I try to take when it comes to sales tax. Okay, so because you're going to see lots of little numbers, I'm trying to get some big numbers in here. So our 2025 revenue for the CIP sales tax fund, remember that's half that number, is $4.75 million. Our current expense, or plan for expense in 2025, out of that fund is $1.1 million. And that expense is related to a bond issuance that is a refinanced bonds that we did in 2013 that are finishing up the payments on this building, and some refinance work on the 911 system. That was all a part of that refinance bundle. And we're currently spending 1.1 on that debt. And it will, the last year of that payment is 2033. So 2034 is our first year that debt issuance is paid off. So that means if you do the simple math of 4.7 minus 1.1, the amount of current funds that we have in 2025 to support debt issuance is $3.6 million. And there is a fund balance in that fund of $24 million. I say this to illustrate that we've been working a long time to get towards this. This has been a planned project because this is the one place where we can issue debt to support this work. And so there is a substantial fund balance that we plan to use towards this project. And there's substantial capacity, and that is that bolded number of 3.6 to support, in essence, a mortgage payment. So a debt payment is like a mortgage payment. And in terms of fund balance, financial advisor is supposed to be here, and he's not here. So I'm going to speak for him, and I can get him to clarify some things. He is supportive for retaining in this fund balance that we only really need to retain at $4.7 million, which is in essence 1 year's worth of revenue, which would be all we would be paying for in the debt. So this would have a lower percentage of fund balance than some of our other funds, because we only it's a different type of payment structure. And if the commissioner, let's say sales tax took a giant negative, you would have one more fiscal year to adjust revenues to make sure we paid that debt. Okay, see?
Sorry, Sarah, that was the 4.75
Yep.
to match what our current, okay, thank you.
Here comes all the little numbers. So I'm going to try to make this bigger, and I'm going to try to walk you through it because some of the stuff at the bottom is less important. So I worked with financial advisor to come up with two models. What I'm calling the low scenario. So what is kind of the low end of what the most conservative option of what we could afford, and then a high end. If I wanted to max out our complete capacity to finance debt, what would it be? So this is our low scenario. I'm going to walk you through these columns because there's a lot of columns. So in the first one, you have the years that we're paying down towards. Then the next column in the kind of gray is the existing debt service. So that's what we're paying on that existing debt. And you can see it rolls off there in 2033 is our last year for paying it. Then the column that says add to reserve, financial advisor put that in to just sort of indicate that from then on, from 2035 on, or forward on, that money is still coming into that fund. So it sits in that column. And we're going to leave that for now, and then we're going to move on. So the columns for principal and interest, coupon and interest, add all together to total P&I. And that is the principal on the debt and then the coupon and the interest rate. Now, this is where I really wish he was here because I'm going to mess up the coupon part. But I think from what I understand, from what my, he is proposing here, those are the interest rates towards, the coupon is showing that percentage of the interest rate, then that gets translated into the interest. The reason why it's going up like that is we will not have a variable rate debt, but he's trying to show a very conservative option that depending on the year we issued it, it would get more and more expensive. So again, this is kind of a very conservative approach to it. If and when we issue this debt, we will lock in that interest rate and we'll have that interest rate for the life of the loan unless we choose to refinance. So the total P&I represents the amount of debt and interest that is issued based off of that, the funds that we have available. The gross revenue is showing I forgot, I have another chart that I missed. So I'm going to skip ahead because I think it got put in the wrong, we'll do it later. So the gross revenue is showing that if that fund continues to grow at 2%, that is how much money is coming into that fund each year. So it's just a revenue column of 2%. So the surplus and deficit is only a column that relates to just the specific P&I. So it's just like, okay, how much are you paying out that year? How much do we have left? And then I had him include our beginning, the beginning reserves and the ending cash reserves in here so that commissioners could see that that money is still sitting there. Under this issuance, it's going to be my recommendation that we spend $20 million in cash towards this project. But I wanted you to see that throughout the life of that, if you subtract 20 million from any of those columns, you have enough to make your interest payment.
So that beginning reserves fund balance, they use the 24 rather than using that 20 that reserves that 4.75 million.
Right. Because I didn't want to, when you start throwing in the cash towards the project, it kind of complicates things. So I wanted commissioners to feel very comfortable that we have, that we'll talk, that we can subtract 20 million and you're still going to have over 4 million in every one of those years at this very conservative scenario to cover your debt payment. I know it's a little confusing, but.
So that 20 million is impacting our interest rate, or is that not calculated in
It's
that?
not calculated in it because you're issuing less debt. So when I'm going to get to you what your totals are here, what you're actually, in this situation, if you go to the very number at the top, we're only issuing 61 million in debt. And it's really 60 million in debt. The remaining 1.3 there goes towards the debt issuance cost. So this would get, the lowest number gets us 60 million in debt. Commissioners, we've talked about this with this project before. The budget parameters or the targets that Dunn and Traynor have been working towards were originally around 74 million. So if they gulp when they see this slide, it's because 60 million is not enough to pay for what we've been working towards. So, but you add 60 million to the 20 million, you get to 80 million. Does that make sense? Okay. Next slide. Just got to catch up. Okay, here's my high scenario. Similar columns on the existing debt service, but instead of add to reserve, we structure the debt to say, okay, once we pay off those existing bonds, let's start to pay off more principal because we've taken out a larger loan. So the principal gets larger there, coupon, interest, total P&I, same thing as you saw on the previous slide. Gross revenue, because it's just pure revenue into this fund, stays the same. Surplus deficit, pretty close because you've stretched out some of the principal to later in the project. Reserves stay the same because in this situation, I'm still just trying to show you that if we just issue debt off of the money coming into this fund, you could now issue 68 million or roughly, you could issue 68 million instead of the 60 million you had before. So, to me, it's a really it's an interest. You're going to gain 12 million in principal. You're going to spend 12 million, because if you look at the difference between like the total principal from this slide to the last one, you're spending 12 million to get 8, because that's where interest rates are today. But generally, when you have a project, you need the money up front. So the next slide. Why it is not wanting to move. Oh yeah, I think I left my other slide out. I don't think I need it. I wanted to show you some different scenarios if the revenues grow faster than 2%. I'm not comfortable using scenarios more than a 2% revenue growth rate in this fund, but I will tell you, as you saw with that first chart, we've had plenty of years where we've been over 2%. Anything that comes in over our budget amount comes into this fund. So that's been why we've developed such higher balances in it, because we are very conservative in how we approach the estimate, and the additional funds come in here. So I will make this smaller because it doesn't need to be so big now, to try to summarize it and make it a little summarized, but I wanted to show you the math behind it. Our existing funds, so these are existing dollars that we already have today, with a revenue grade of 2%. I showed you the other slide, I don't have in here, it's a 3.5, will support 79 million to 87 million in new expense. And that comes from the $20 million in cash to the 60 versus the 78 million in debt after issuance costs, depending on how the debt is structured. So this is our window of what our existing capacity will allow us to afford.
This is showing 60 to 78, and I thought the two scenarios were 61 and 68.
You're right, sorry. Typo. So yeah, the 87's right. I didn't change that last bullet point. These numbers were changing as of yesterday, so I apologize. So you see it before the 60. So the 87 is total, so it should be 68 down below. Apologize for that, commissioners. If you take a picture of it, Josie, you have to promise me you're going to change that last bullet point. All right. I'm going to stop sharing, but commissioners, we are available to answer any questions you have.
Just backing up, one of the kind of premises we started from when we started talking about getting serious about this project was, what could we afford without taking any of that to mill levy, without taking that to a tax increase of any sort. So these are the scenarios you brought us, is that this is what we can afford within our current taxing structure.
Yes, none of that highest scenario I showed you does not require any additional revenues, no tax increase.
It's always just worth restating.
Right. I'll make a banner if you'd like.
And when will we get those alternate price? It will be before our 11th meeting, right? Did that come out on our agenda on that Friday, or?
Yeah, so that's one of those things is I actually would love till Monday to update it if that's okay. But it's going to be important for us to state that it's going to show a recommendation from staff, but it's nothing is decided until the commission meets and makes that allocation. And commissioners, we're in our conversations about where we're at with the budget cost estimate. The county has already paid a significant amount of funds to Trainer for design work on this project. We saved up cash to pay for that project, and that was supported in our CIP fund. I'm not including those numbers. Those numbers have already been spent. We've already spent that cash, and we've invested. They've done a lot of work for us over these last 7 years to get us to this point. And so it's basically what is left of design, and that they would follow them through the rest of the project. Any fees then that Dunn gets for being our construction manager, the construction itself, and then soft costs associated with it. And then, so I want to say this, and I know Brooke is here as well. We also have around $1 million in our CIP contingency fund that is available And to commissioners, if for some reason the bids come in a situation where we feel like we need those funds, we have funds in CIP that are not allocated towards a current project, that are in that contingency fund. I know it's a little more than that, but that we could allocate towards the project as well. And as commissioners know, we dedicate a portion of our mill levy, so our property tax dollars, to our CIP every year to pay cash for projects. What we would look to do is begin to save up funds from that process and or any overage, like any excess revenues that come in, and begin to accumulate cash again to finish shelling out these spaces. So my intent would be to get to the 20-year plan of the public safety building to use cash on hand. I would not anticipate that we would need to issue debt any further for the rest of this master plan for these projects.
So I think when we get to prices on the alternates, that's kind of another question that we'll be looking at is if not now, then what is the time frame of then when that is likely to occur? Because many of these pieces are anticipated, some of them are not, but I mean are true alternates.
Agreed, and that's the reason why, particularly with the public safety building, the warm shell is, as Chris called it, but trying to get that first level completed. So evidence storage, garage, sheriff's operations, just the warm shell, not cubes and carpet. It's so much cheaper to do that now when they have mobilized to come here and to get that done. And it also saves us in the future because I'm not trying to build steel beams above an operating 911 center, which is what we would have to do if we do not complete that shell. So, the reason why we put these ad alternates in place was thoughtful. It wasn't just like, what can we get? It was done in a way to sort of make what makes the most sense and what's most cost efficient, because while construction costs are, extremely high, and you've seen all those charts about how much they go up, they're not going to get any cheaper. So, it does make some sense to do as much as we can now.
Sarah, I mean, those are long timelines to 2044. When you look at all of our facilities, I know we've moved some different departments out to some other buildings recently. What's the thing that's coming between now and 2044 that may need to be delayed?
Well, I appreciate you asking that, Commissioner, and I'm going to pull up that kind of low slide again so you can just sort of see that piece, if I can get it to, I would say that, we have a 5-year CIP, and we've talked about this. This is a very dangerous thing for an administrator to say. I don't see another large capital project on our event horizon that would be in this millions of dollars timeframe in the next 10 to 15 years. That being said, lots of things change and constantly evolve in our space. We have a jail that's has been updated, but if the community grows in a way and we're not able to manage our jail population, that's our other biggest facility that would need some sort of upgrade and renovation. So you're never going to get a county administrator to say that that the jail isn't a concern in terms of the capital investment that might be needed, but I think we're managing that, and we've talked about how we manage that inside our with programs and services. But that's why the low end scenario of issuing $61 million in debt. This is what happens when you have too many slides open. Is helpful because this scenario where you get 60 million in debt and then we have 20 million in cash to pay for an $80 million project, which is more than what we've told Dunn and Traynor they had to spend on this project, allows us after 2034 to think of what would have to come next. I feel relatively confident that we would not have another capital project of this size and nature inside that event horizon of before 2033. Boy, that's, all my fingers and toes are crossed, but yes.
I know some of the pieces we'll want to have to evaluate some of these things, like what's the cost currently for like the rented space that search and recovery is taking up? So that's money that would then be saved if we were to shell out that portion. And I had some questions about that piece too. Just the parking spaces have been mentioned in that kind of alternate, where later there would be some changing spaces, locker room type spaces, and I wonder if those aren't supposed to be paired in terms of the usefulness of that space. So do we get the full usefulness of the search and recovery parking location if we don't have the changing spaces that go with it?
I think you guys might be able to tell more about what's in the specific. I think in the design for that shell is just a garage and just a place to store evidence. That's it.
There is an office for that person who mans all those vehicles and needs to work there, maybe not full-time, but sometimes. We also have there's no offices really, there's an evidence tech space for when evidence is placed there, they have to process it and do different things to it and make sure it's stored correctly and tagged. So there's spaces for them to work, but you're right, the full locker rooms won't be there. The workout spaces, there'll be bathrooms and everything. And on the lower level's got a whole break room and it's all fully built out that we're sharing. The dispatch and EOC have their own separate spaces and there's a kind of a 2-story break room in the middle that everyone in that building can go down there and use it. It's got basically a full kitchen, if you will, and storage space for refrigerators and places to break for lunch and all that. So that place will be available.
I think the reason I'm asking is I assume what they're planning to park there would be boats from that search and recovery, which is what they have at the offsite location now. And so, changing into wetsuits and other things that I'm just curious if the shelled space just for parking gets them the full functionality that they need to also have that program there.
Well, it doesn't get them their full functionality, but right now it's storage in a storage unit in a commercial place.
So it gets them what they have now.
Yes.
That's the functionality they're
Yes.
used to there.
Yes,
Okay.
and it
That's
will
what I
also
wanted to know.
hold, in addition to sheriff's boats, it's going to hold the emergency management mobile response vehicle. And I mean, if we were actively talking about particularly hosting the mobile vehicle, building something out here at Public Works, because it's a very, you spent ARPA funds, it was a pretty expensive investment. It has to be under roof. It's got sensitive electronics, so it can't be exposed to the elements. So that's why those two pieces are most important. I do want to say, and the sheriff's not here, I want to say that this is less than ideal for his team. He is going to have things in a variety of places and not as cohesive as he needs. He is the one that really gets less of what he desires in this model than many of the stakeholders involved in this project.
And I've heard that from him. And that's why I'm asking some of these questions to see, if these pieces become on the table and they may or may not be, is it true help? And I know the parking spaces, including the emergency management vehicle, both important. And evidence storage is the other piece I've heard the sheriff talking about, and I know that's why it's included here. But I don't know what's wrong with the space they have, why it needs to be here. Presumably there are reasons for that make this one of the pieces that they're asking to move over sooner rather than later.
Because it's integrated into the design of the JLE, so in the renovation. So the existing space that it's taking up inside that building was built for it and Lawrence Police Department. So it's really, really big because it was meant to hold all of Lawrence's evidence storage. So either we make a smaller evidence storage for 5 years in that building, but eventually we move it out, or we just build a smaller, more appropriate evidence storage in the new building. Did I get that right, Chris?
Yes, and we also need that space for courtrooms that is currently housed in as well. So in order to build and make all these changes, that space is a premium where it's located at along that main corridor. And your point you made about if we have to move that evidence twice, because we're not moving it to its permanent home, that's a big issue too, because all that stuff is sensitive. And then we're going to spend money to move it to a smaller area at the existing building, or we spend money and put it at its permanent home. So
So the
those are all.
space where it currently says it's too big, also it's needed for other things.
Yes.
So we will be building it somewhere.
We're going to
Yes.
spend money to put
Got
that
it.
evidence somewhere, and we're going to move it twice at that point, if we eventually move it out to its final place. So,
And there was one other piece that was included in that alternate build out, was over on the right-hand side.
yeah, I think that was the public lobby, probably when someone's visiting, that's going to be the front door. And so they'll come in there and then the quarters to actually get to the finished spaces.
And that's really, it won't be built out. It's just going to be the warm shell. And the reason why it has a public lobby is because this will be the home of warrants and civil service and patrol. So all the kind of public interaction that the sheriff's office takes now on the second floor of the Judicial and Law Enforcement building will eventually move out to this space.
So the public entrance is behind the current jail as opposed to,
Next to. But if you want to pull up you could pull up the site map and
so just, as we've looked at it, it seemed like the,
pull up site map for the PSB.
trying to decide like what is the secured and the unsecured space that we're looking at here.
So, it kind of depends on which phase of the project too. So, yep.
Right there, yeah.
Yeah, so in between the blue is what's going to be built now. The top of it is mostly in the basement, so that's secured. The top level is just going to be shell. Eventually, the place farthest down to the bottom of the screen, which I think is north on this.
North is up. It's up.
North is
South
up.
down.
North is
Yeah.
up. So, I'm sorry, yeah, north is up. So, architects always smart with north is up. That space would be the only eventual unsecured space.
But the public would enter right here, and we're kind of sharing the existing parking lot, but we're bringing some spaces closer to the front door to make it more accessible. But not very many spaces. They don't need a lot. There's not a lot of visitors to this spot, and the public will enter in right there.
And can you put your cursor over the existing jail so that you can kind of see
Yeah,
it's that
I
white?
can see.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so the staff and everyone would come through a secured gate, if this mouse will move, right back here, and then they park all the way around the back, and their permanent parking's right here. And this is their secure entry right there.
Okay,
That would
thank
be
you.
staff, yeah.
So timing wise, especially with the holiday coming up, you mentioned that you expect to have all of the bids evaluated by the week after Thanksgiving, which then that would be on our following week's agenda. So Sarah, I suppose that's why you mentioned Monday earlier would probably be the best. Is that fair to say from Trainer and J.E. Dunn's perspective that you need through that Friday to be able to receive and evaluate the rest of the details to give us good numbers for review on the 11th?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, we're doing most of the heavy lifting this week. Unfortunately, next week, holidays get in the way, so we're trying to talk to 200 bidders, and if they're on holiday, we can't get a hold of them next week, which allows that week right after the holiday to finish everything up, and then we come meet with you.
Okay, so I'm cheap and I always come to these questions. But the non-public entrance, which is in the center of the building, then is pretty fancy and has a lot of glass and, is a little bit more showy than the public entrance. Can you talk to me about that?
Yes, it's a little larger, but they're both like both of them basically the same kind of design. They have a sloping roof, they have some glass door to enter into. A lot of our facilities, we try to celebrate that entry a little bit for the staff because they're there every day, all day long, right, all year long. And a lot of facilities, they'll have some side door and it just feels like you're not really coming to work, that isn't an entry or an arrival. And the small amount of celebration that we're doing, we did do it basically right there at that space, just for that reason. It'd be not elaborate, in my opinion, but definitely nicer than the rest of the building. Kind of just lays down with punched openings for windows, but there is a little bit more expensive glass at that spot.
I would say for a period of time, the people working in that space are 911 operators are going to be in a lower level that aren't going to have as much access to light and, they're going to be in a pretty controlled environment.
A lot of stress too, right? So when you come to work and you can leave that stressful spot and stay at work and remove yourself from that and get into a different environment, different world, mental health issues, it really helps alleviate a lot of that stress.
I would also note that public access or use of the building is super minimal considering all the other public buildings that the county has too.
Yes, if you're either going to meet with somebody or you're going there to file a report or something like that, but there's not a lot of public traffic, so that space just didn't need to be larger. But we do have to have a front door, and we keep it secure. That helps us minimize the amount of space that we have to have the sheriff maintain security.
Commissioners, we're coming up on 5 o'clock. What other questions and thoughts do you want to get to?
I don't have any more questions.
Really appreciate the many years of work that have gone into getting us this far, and I know we have some significant pieces to get to in terms of the funding and financing and our prices putting on that. So we will look forward to those discussions too. But I know this has been in the works a long time, and I'd maybe even push it back before that 2017 with that, because that's when we published our space needs study that had been going on from several years even prior to that. So, commissioners, if there are no other questions or thoughts at this time, we will recess until our 5:30 business meeting. Thank you all for being here.